Let me add my welcome to Matt. It's good to be with us together this morning. If we just put the first slide up on the screen, guys, this is a picture of a book that was brought out in 2021, it's by a couple called Benjamin and Jenna Story, and it was titled "Why We Are Restless." And it considers how we as human beings are constantly looking for peace and contentment, and yet why the things that we seek to bring us that contentment continually fail to deliver. And it kind of explains that kind of very human thing that we say to ourselves, if only I had this, or if only I had that, I would feel content. If only I had him, or if only I had her, all would be well. But the authors report that these desires for contentment and well-being are never satisfied. And even when we do get this or that or him or her, we remain a restless people. And they observe that although they refer to this as a modern quest, that it's not actually a modern phenomenon at all. They have a great quote from somebody who visited America in the 1830s, and he said this: "They are a restless people in the midst of their well-being." They are a restless people in the midst of their well-being. What they're seeking to address in this book is in fact an age-old issue, part of the human condition, why we are restless. But if we go on to the next slide, you will see that this very much is not a modern issue. Here we are, St. Augustine, back in the 4th century, refers to human restlessness. And here he offers a diagnosis and also a solution. So he wrote these words in a prayer: "O Lord, you have made us and drawn us to yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." Well, you can see Augustine's diagnosis there. Ultimately, we are not at rest because we're made to know God, and whilst we're away from him, we're not at home, we're not at peace, we're not at rest. And then elsewhere he goes on to explain that it is through Jesus that God gives us rest with himself. And he reminds us that Jesus once called out, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." So it should really come as no surprise to us that the Bible has many stories about people looking for rest and finding that rest in the one that God has given, which is exactly what we have in our reading this morning, which Wendy read so nicely for us. And I think my prayer this week has been that we grasp afresh, or maybe for the first time, something of the goodness of God in providing all that we need in the man that he has given us, so that we might rest in him. Let me just say that again. I think my prayer this week has been that we grasp afresh, or perhaps even for the first time, something of the goodness of our God in providing all that we need in the man he's given us, so that we might know rest in him. So let's go on to the next slide. The title this morning: "The One Who Brings an End to Our Restlessness." Well, Matt's already reminded us this morning that we're working through the Bible book of Ruth. And Ruth is a young widow from the land of Moab who has relocated with her mother-in-law, Naomi, to Bethlehem in Judah. And last week, Matt showed us how in chapter 2, Ruth was regularly referred to as a foreigner or the Moabitess. She had no real place in Judah, and it must have been a very difficult experience for her at that time. But whilst others overlooked her, she was noticed by this man called Boaz, and she was treated kindly by him. He encourages her to pick up leftover grain in the fields and provides protection for us. And if you look at the end of chapter 2, we have this verse: "So Ruth stayed close to the servant girls of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvest was finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law." But as we read this morning, that situation would not last all that long, and a more permanent solution was needed. Chapter 3, verse 1. "One day, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to Ruth, 'My daughter, should I not find a home for you where you will be well provided for? Now that word translated home is actually the Hebrew word for rest. Naomi wants to find a place of rest for Ruth, a place where she will be permanently provided for. And as we go through this chapter, we will see that that home, that place of rest, becomes a real possibility for Ruth through God's plan and through God's man. It's a lovely story. It has a happy ending, as we'll see when we get into chapter 4. And it's a chapter 3, which really divides into 3 parts, each part focused on the 3 main characters in this book. So let's go to the next slide, guys, and start with Naomi, who seeks rest for Ruth. Now, Wendy read it very nicely, but let me just read these 4 verses again so we can follow the story. One day, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to Ruth, "My daughter, should I not find a home or a rest for you where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours? Tonight he'll be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor. But don't let him know you are there until he's finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he's lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." So as Naomi thinks about Ruth's need for a place of rest and provision, her mind turns to Boaz, who's already noticed Ruth, commended her for her loyalty and her faith to the God of Israel. But what encourages Naomi further is the fact that Boaz is related to her family and therefore has kind of obligations towards them. Now, Matt touched on this a little bit last week, because we learned in chapter 2 that Boaz is somebody referred to as a kinsman redeemer, a kind of a close relative to Naomi and Ruth with responsibilities towards them. That title, kinsman redeemer, actually refers to kind of 2 social or even legal responsibilities at the time. The first of those is something called levirate marriage. And that word levir is Latin for brother-in-law. And here is what the Old Testament says. Let's put the next slide up. Here we are in Deuteronomy 25. If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. So that's the first thing that's kind of established in law, in society at that time. It's referred to as levirate brother-in-law marriage, levirate marriage. The second thing that's referred to in this phrase, kinsman redeemer, is that close family members also had the opportunity to act as a redeemer when a family hit hard times. That word redeem means to buy back. So, for instance, if one of the Israelites ended up selling their land because they got into a kind of a bankruptcy situation, then their relatives would have the opportunity to buy it back so that the wider family or tribe would not lose it permanently. Now, I wonder whether you could see in both of those cases, firstly with this levirate marriage, keeping the family name, and then with this redeeming, keeping the family land. In both of them, we see that God is concerned to keep his people's inheritance, that they have these things for the long term, not the short term. The God of the Bible is a God who gives us things that last. There's an assurance and a security in his relationships with his people. Under God's good hands, under God's good laws, Naomi and Ruth are not left completely defenseless. Now, even at this point in the chapter, our own confidence in the God of the Bible should be fed and encouraged. The fact that he cared for the widow and the poor at that time by providing rest for them in time of need should encourage us in our understanding of him. Likewise today, he cares for us in our current need. Ultimately, our need of a help and a home with him, our need of spiritual rest. He is the one who provides and cares. Now, quite why Naomi comes up with this specific plan for her daughter-in-law is not clear. Quite why Ruth, for instance, should approach Boaz in the late evening when he's been eating and drinking is not clear. Quite why she should wait until he lies down and then lie down next to him and uncover his feet so that he wakes and sees her there is not clear. But having received these instructions, she goes down to the threshing floor and follows them, you might say, to the letter. So the next part of our chapter really shows us this. Ruth, let's go to the next slide. Ruth rests her hope on Boaz. Let me just read verses 5 through to 9 as we follow this story. Having received instructions from her mother-in-law, verse 5, Ruth says this, I will do whatever you say. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned and discovered a woman lying at his feet. Who are you? He asked. I'm your servant Ruth, she said. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer. I want us to recognize that what was going on here was actually very risky for Ruth. I certainly would never have advised either of my daughters to look for their husbands in the way that Ruth approaches Boaz. It was frightening what she was doing. It could have ended badly. Ruth could have been taken advantage of. Her vulnerability could have been exploited, or her approach could simply have been rejected. And furthermore, we learned that there were actually other places where Ruth could have looked for help and a home. The text later refers to younger or choice men, whether rich or poor. But in all that happened that night, our passage records just one sentence from Ruth. And it's a sentence that helps us understand why she's there and what she's doing. Just look at the passage. Where is the one place we actually have the words of Ruth? It's there in verse 9. Who are you? Boaz asked, and she replies like this. I am your servant Ruth. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are my kinsman redeemer. It's the only words we have from Ruth in that whole encounter on the threshing floor. Those words are very significant. Firstly this, she uses a phrase about Boaz, which Boaz himself had used about the God of Israel. Matt referred to it right at the beginning of our time together. In chapter 2, verse 12, Boaz commends Ruth and says this, May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, look at this, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Now, that when Ruth says to Boaz, cover me with the corner of your garment, those words can be translated, spread your wings over your servant. It's the same language, you see, that Boaz has used when describing Ruth as having taken refuge under God's wings. But the second thing is this, she refers to him as the kinsman redeemer. This one that we were thinking about earlier, the one through whom her late husband's name would be maintained and the family property would be maintained in accordance with God's wishes. Now, in effect, at this point, Ruth is saying to Boaz this, you are God's man and I will have no other. That's why I'm here. That's what I'm doing. That's what I've understood. You are God's man and I will have no other. Now, you may have seen a television program called The £1 Million Drop. And it starts with contestants being given £1 million in wads of cash. And then they face a number of multiple choice questions, each with, I think, 3 or 4 different answers. The answers are kind of A, B, C, D. And in front of them are 4 containers with A, B, C, and D. And they have to decide to put their money, this £1 million, on one of those boxes, or they can spread them out. Now, the lids of those boxes are actually trapdoors. So if they, for instance, the answer is C, and they put some of their money on A or B, when the answer is revealed, C, the lid stays there and their money stays there, but anything on A and B drops, and they've lost their bit of their £1 million. So what they do is that when they face this question, they then kind of hedge their bets. They think, well, I'm not quite sure about the answer, so I'll put a bit on A and a bit on B, and I'm not sure about C, I'll put a bit on D. Of course, the answer is revealed, and boom, 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 and they're left with a little bit less, and then they spread it out. And at the end of the show, after going through all these multiple questions, it's lucky if they retain any of that money. But the only thing they go home with is a round of applause. Now, I want us to imagine Ruth that night as being like one of those contestants. But she doesn't carry cash in her hands, rather something far more important. She carries her future in her hands. She carries her need for a home, for a rest, for provision. And there's no hedging of her bets. She, as it were, takes the whole lot and places it on the lid named Boaz. I am your servant, Ruth. Spread the corner of your garment, your wings over me, since you are my kinsman redeemer. Here, in her eyes, is God's man, and everything now rests on him. Everything rests on him. If you've ever wanted a demonstration of what faith means in the Bible, here it is. Ruth trusts herself into Boaz's keeping because she sees and knows that he is God's man for her. And in the same way, the Christian believer has come to see that Jesus is God's man given to them, into whose keeping they can entrust their lives and their future rest. We in effect say, I am Martin or Sue or Phil or Clarissa or whatever. I am your servant. Spread your wings over me. Cover me, since you are my kinsman redeemer. As Ruth rests her hope on God's man Boaz, so we rest our hope on God's man Jesus. I wonder whether you've done that. I wonder whether you have really seen him as the one given for you, into whose hands you can entrust your future, even your eternal rest. If that's not something you've done, maybe it's something you might want to have a chat with Matt about later. Now, before we finish this morning, let's get back to the crucial question, which is, how does Boaz respond to this approach? And let's read verses 10 and 18 as we put the final slide up on the screen. How does Boaz respond? Verse 10, the Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem, good, let him redeem. But if he's not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized, and he said, don't let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. Verse 15, he also said, bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out. When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, how did it go, my daughter? Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Then Naomi said this, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. There is a description of Jesus in the Gospels which says this, he did everything well. And I think that could also fit Boaz at this point. he did everything well. You may have noticed that as we went through. He commends Ruth for trusting herself into God's provision for the family name. He seeks to calm her fears that her approach might be misinterpreted. He's open about the possible obstacle to their union and promises to do everything he can to resolve it. As a sign of generosity, he provides abundant grain from his harvest pile, so much so that he has to put it on her and sends her home. And then comes the debrief back with Naomi, to which Naomi responds with these words: "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." Can you see there's a kind of a rather fitting conclusion here to this chapter? Chapter 3, verse 1, Naomi is looking for rest for Ruth. At the beginning of the chapter, Ruth is not in a place of rest. At the end, Boaz is not in a place of rest. He will not rest until the matter is resolved. At the beginning, things need to happen before Ruth can be at rest. At the end, things need to happen before Boaz can be at rest. The restlessness has been transferred from Ruth to Boaz. Her need for rest has been transferred to him. He's taken it upon himself. He is the one who now will not rest until she is at rest. Again, I wonder whether we can see echoes of God's man, Jesus, here. As we come to the elements of communion in a minute, we're reminded that he takes our need and makes it his own. And he does everything necessary to see us at rest. His rest with his heavenly Father was broken at the cross so that ours might be formed and formed for eternity. Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, took the responsibility of our salvation upon himself and will not rest until we are at rest. He will not rest until we are at rest. Everything about him tells us he's God's man given to us. We can fully put our trust in him. He will not rest until we are at rest. So as we finish, let's just remind ourselves of those words. "Come to me," said Jesus, "all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." The question now is, how will we respond to that? "Come," says Jesus, "and I will give you rest."